Hello there, welcome back to the Closet Historian and back to my sewing room once again for a sort of impromptu extra bonus kind of project video here. Last week I showed this wrap style top in my roundup of things I've been sewing recently, and so many of you were interested in the pattern and seeing how this one is made that I decided to go ahead and try and make another one quite quickly here and squeeze another video in this week. I was really happy with how that top had come out, so it wasn't too much of a chore to make another one, even though this next one I made is actually quite similar. But oh well, you'll see what I mean in just a second. It's a pretty simple style to both pattern draft and to sew, so let's jump on over to the blue patterning table of doom, as always, and get started. So I'll be using my all-in-one sleeve or kimono sleeve bodice block to draft this pattern today. I've shown how to do this modification before recently, so I will put a card up to the video where I show how to do that here. But here on the front, one of the main things I'm going to be doing is taking this dart fullness from the waist and swinging it into two side darts instead. So I'm going to swing this fullness from the waist into the side, and to do so I'm going to draw a line from the side up to the apex and then a little bit further down. I'm just kind of centering these along the side seam. It's not any particular place. And then I will draw from the dart leg up to the apex down here as well from the waist. That way I can swing this waist dart closed and spread the fullness in between two darts into the side seam. So I will just cut up from the waist up to the apex here, and then again along these indicators I drew from the side here, again to the apex but not all the way through it, so that this kind of remains hinged. So you can go ahead and do some slashing and spreading. That's what they call this technique, because you slash the pattern and then you spread the fullness open to where you want it to be. So now that I have that cut apart here, I can go ahead and take this and overlap down here and close this waist dart and move, therefore, in doing so, have moved the fullness into those side darts instead. So I'll go ahead and tape this area all the way shut here, and now our waist dart has been eliminated and the fullness has been moved into those side darts instead. So you can, have one big dart and one little dart over here, whatever you want to do. I'm just going to split the fullness evenly. I'm just going to tape in some extra paper here, of course, and then tape this down to have created my new side darts for this. I just kind of like the way this fits better a little bit. One big dart from the waist like that can be a little bit pointy no matter how well you sew your dart. So splitting it into two in the side like this, I find just fits a little bit smoother. So sometimes I take the extra effort and split my dart fullness into two. Of course, that does mean I will have to sew two darts on each side instead of one on each side now, but alas, I sew so many darts anyway, it's not that big of a deal. So once I have these all taped down, I'm going to go ahead and fold them shut with the fullness facing down towards the waist, please. There we go, yes. So I'm going to fold that, not perfectly, just perfect along the side seam, but not down to the point or anything, doesn't really matter. I'm just going to fold those shut here so that I can cut along the side seam here, and then I will get the perfect shape that I need on the ends of those darts. You know how darts usually have a little bit of an extension that's pointed. This will give you the exact shape you need here. So I'm just going to cut this while I have it folded in my hand, and then you will see it gives me the perfect ends to my darts here. So now I have the exact shape I need, this little dagged edge, I guess, that will fold and lay smooth when it gets to the sewing portion of everything. But I can go ahead and start cutting all of this out now. So I'm going to cut here along the now smooth waistline, and then up here along the center front, which of course will be cut along the fold, which is why I have those arrows on fold on all my patterns. And then up here at the neckline, I realized I want to make a little adjustment and change it to have that very high little V-neck that I do. So I'm going to come in about 1/4 of an inch from the neck that my sloper has, basically, or that my block has, and then I'm going to connect that down into a small V down here just in the very front. So I'm just V'ing the very end of this, and I'll curve the shoulder down into that little V. So I just have this very high, slight V neckline up here at the top. This is a very high-necked blouse I'm making here, but I like that it gives me a lot of room to showcase the print of a fabric, or put a brooch on, or several brooches, It's good for displaying jewelry. I'm just going to finish cutting this out now, including down here along the sleeve. I'm just going to go ahead and label this while I'm here. Wrap top front 2020. Are you not going to write 2020? Oh, come on, girl. Ridiculous. So I can set that aside. Now I can go ahead and begin to fix the back of this, which is of course where most of the action is happening for this wrap style top. And in order to do a wrap style, I'm going to need to trace my bodice back pattern here and mirror it. So I trace a full back basically. So my card pattern here has about a 5/8, well, not about, and actually a 5/8 seam allowance along the back here for putting in a zipper normally, because I usually use center back zippers in my dresses. But of course I don't need that 5/8, so I'm mirroring it along the actual center back here so I can have a full back. And I will go ahead and transfer over my shoulder from the front just so that I can make sure that I have the same amount away from the neckline here. So I'm just holding that shoulder up to where that will be a shoulder seam and transferring that onto the neckline, curving that into the back neck here. I actually do it on the other side too, even though of course this whole side is going to be cut off. And here is my pattern from the one you saw last week, and you can see that the modification that's about to happen here. We're going to close this dart and turn this into a wrap style. So I'm just going to mark down here about an inch up. I really need to make this 1.5 inches, but I only marked it like an inch here for whatever reason, because we're going to taper down to the waist here. And then from up here at the neckline, we're going to connect that wrap area up to the neckline, and we're going to make sure that this line crosses through the point of this dart on this side. So I'm making a kind of, it's mostly a straight line, it's slightly curved. You could use a hip curve or something like this. I'm just going to sketch in a very shallow curve that crosses through this dart point and then comes down to where I want my wrap to end at my waistline here. But the most important thing about this is that it crosses through that dart point, because that is how you are able to close the dart. So I'm going to go ahead and cut along that sketched in line I just drew up to the neckline on the other side. You could make this, you know, either on the left hand or the right hand side here. It won't matter because you're going to cut one of each in the end anyway. Here I'm going to cut up this dart leg to that point there so that I can go ahead and close that dart. So I can go ahead and close that along the waist here, and then I like to overlap it a little bit extra up here along the wrap of itself. Just helps to remove a little bit of extra fullness along this so that the back wrap doesn't gape at all. So I'm overlapping up here about 1/4 inch before I tape this down. So down here at my waist, where my thumb is, I don't have it overlapped at all. I just have it right along the line, but then I angle that up to 1/4 inch overlap at the top here. Then this excess that is creating a kind of nasty looking line here, I'm just going to cut that off just so we have a smooth line along the wrap again. And I'm just going to cut that excess away for we do not need it anymore. Alas, goodbye. So here is the back pattern, all modified really. I'm going to go ahead and cut this out now. Okay, all cut out. I can lay my pattern from the one you saw last week on top of this just to show you the difference. This sleeve has been smoothed off. So the way to do that is just to take your ruler and go ahead and slide this all the way up to the shoulder seam, and then you don't have to worry about having this little sleeve extension. But because I'll be fully lining this garment today, I'm not worried about it in any way. Of course, if you have this as a straight line, it's very easy to hem. I kind of showed this in another recent video, so I'll put a card up to that if you want to see another way of doing this sort of sleeve, I guess, if you do it straight across like this. But the two look super similar on. I'm just leaving the extension on for this one, just my normal all-in-one sleeve, as opposed to making it just a tiny bit shorter like I did for that last version of this. So I technically will have two versions of this top pattern now that are very similar. But here is wrap, top, back. Alas, ready to go. So now I have my front and back pattern, and I can lay out my fabric and kind of decide. There we go. Look, I finally wrote 2020 on there. Perfect. Good. Thank you. Honestly, me from the past. What are you doing? So I can go ahead and grab my fabric for this project. This fabric it's 1 yard of fabric from Mood. It's a wider width, but the pattern is kind of sparse in some areas and then very patterned in others. So I wanted to make sure I centered one of these motifs along the front here. And even then, it's not going to be fully even. So one side will be more patterned than the other. But I wanted to get like a full motif across the front of this pattern. So I am still it's still along the straight grain here, but I've just got it folded right in the middle of one of these motifs of this print. Hopefully that makes sense. When you cut things out of a patterned fabric, you of course want to be careful where you are placing your pattern pieces, so where that pattern will end up on your body. For example, I made a wrap dress recently that had cherries as part of the print, and I wanted to make sure that there weren't any cherries ending up somewhere particularly inappropriate on the body when I was done cutting it out. So you just want to be careful when you're cutting with a print to line up that print where you would want it. And with something like this, what is so like sparse in between the larger patterning going on, I wanted to be careful and make sure I got the large painting kind of portion of this along the center of the front of my garment here. So here's my front. I can go ahead and cut that out now. Hopefully everything's lined up like I hope. Actually, here I am. See, I'm going to reposition just a tiny bit because it's not exactly on the fold. So I am particular. I'm not always super lazy, only about certain things. I feel like I take my time with certain things, and like I'm really particular about certain things, and then I'm really lazy and cut corners with others. So you can see here I'm just repositioning my pattern piece a little bit before I cut this out. I second guessed if I was really on the fold or not. I didn't want any extra space along there. So now we're good to go. I will go ahead and cut this front piece out. This pattern was a print from a collection Mood did a couple years ago, and I bought just a yard of this one, and I wish I had bought more because I was thinking, oh, a yard will be plenty to make a blouse out of, and it was, and it worked out okay, but because of the way the print is positioned on here, it made it hard to get a full motif for the front. And here I am repositioning my fabric a little bit. Sorry there's so much of the top of my head in this video. Just to be able to cut out my backs. I didn't care as much what was going to happen with the print on the backs, but I still was trying to do my best with what fabric I had left. Again, I only had the 1 yard of this. So this one side here underneath where I'm positioning this will be kind of sparse, but luckily the other half of this will have more of the print on it, and I will just go ahead and do the side that has more of the print as the outside of the wrap, and then the underside of the wrap we will do the more sparsely printed bit of this. Just things I keep in mind when cutting things out of pattern fabrics, which, as we know, I use pattern fabrics most of the time. I don't actually make a lot of solid things, which they are very useful, so it's good to have solids, but I just fall in love with prints all the time and end up buying just 1 yard of them like this from Mood. Sometimes their cotton prints will go on sale for like $10 a yard, so I'll just toss 1 yard in my cart and feel free to make a blouse sometime. With a wide fabric, 1 yard will get you usually a little top, like a short sleeve top or a pencil skirt, so it's a pretty safe bet if you fall in love with something to just buy a yard of it. And I will go ahead and cut this one out too. I did go ahead and cut out these backs and another front from some lining fabric as well. I know, shocking, I'll be fully bag lining this project today. Imagine. I never line anything. You're welcome. Every once in a while, I will. And here I'm going to use this awl to poke through my darts so I can mark my darts on these back pieces, of course. I am just going to use colored pencil for this. Here is another one of my lazy bits. Here's the back, so we can see this side has more of the print, so I'll go ahead and make sure that one overlaps over this, so we get those nice cranes going here on this print, like so. But again, I just need to mark my darts in here. I will just be using Prismacolor colored pencil for this, like I always do. Again, you could use a chalk pencil and like one of those ink pens that like the ink becomes invisible or like disappearing ink pen, whatever those are. I haven't had one for many a year. I know very little about them. Again, I just use colored pencil because it works, and most of the time it doesn't matter. This fabric is a little bit on the sheer side to be using colored pencil, honestly. If I was being in less of a rush, I would have found a piece of tailor's chalk. It's not like they're far away. They're nearby, but alas, I am loyal to my weird methods. So go ahead and just pin that dart shut, and then I can set this over my machine. Normally at this point I will sew my darts and then I will serge the raw edges of my pieces, but today, because I will be fully bag lining this, I'm not going to bother serging the raw edges because everything will be encased and enclosed within the garment itself. Just doing the same here for the other side, of course. Marking the dart, lining everything up, pinning it closed, all that jazz. Same things over and over again. Sewing can be rather repetitive, you know, but that's sort of what's nice about it. You just put on an audiobook or a podcast or some music you like. Sometimes recently I've been listening to like fireside soundscape sort of playlists where it's like wind and rain outside with a fireplace crackling and old books turning every once in a while. Or like Hogwarts library sound effects, you know, that kind of thing. There's some really good soundscape videos for just having on in the background on YouTube here. So here is my front. Let's see how the pattern came out here. Looks pretty good for having the print on the front here. Of course, I'm going to have my darts in here, which will distort it a little bit. Doing darts on an angle like this is a little bit more annoying. You do have to like kind of sew them on the bias a bit, which makes it a little bit more irritating. Anytime you start working with bias, it becomes irritating. You'll notice I cut most things I ever do on the straight grain. Not a huge fan of making projects on the bias. Here I'm realizing that my darts, I never drew new dart points. So they're coming all the way up to the apex, which would be a very pointy situation. So I just poked my holes in my awl about an inch down into the dart from my apex there. So a little bit further down, because we don't want our darts going all the way to the apex. That would be a terrible plan, unless you were planning on a very conical look. All right, here over at the machine, I have everything threaded up with some white thread ready to go. You'll see I notice at the end of sewing this first dart that I should have loosened my tension a little bit because it's a little tight with this very lightweight fabric. I believe this is a cotton voile or a cotton lawn. I don't really remember. The difference seems very slim to me. Very lightweight cottons. And because the machine did want to kind of eat it just a tiny bit, I went ahead and made sure I held my threads in the back here. So you see me pinch those. Kind of helps feed the machine to get started onto the project. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew along that chalk colored pencil line here. Should be Taylor's chalk so that it brushes away, but mine isn't, especially with a sheer fabric like this. But, you know, I was going quickly. This wasn't on my schedule, this project. I was like hoping I could make it in an evening so that I could show all of you how I make these. I was supposed to be taking this week off to do writing. Behind the scenes tidbit here. I just tied the ends of my darts, by the way, as you've seen me do it dozens of times. But I was supposed to have I have my video for later in this week, for Thursday, pre-filmed already, because I was supposed to be taking this week off to do some writing. But of course, everyone was requesting this style, and I didn't want to leave you hanging, so here we are, making another wrap top. And here I am, loosening my tension for this, for the next dart, noticing, that was a little tight, wasn't it? That's alright. I will go ahead and sew the rest of my darts. As I always say, sewing is a lot of darts. Or at least fitted sewing like I wear, I suppose. If you're going to make mid-century things, it's going to be a lot of darts in your future. Again, be careful not to tie those ends too tightly, because you don't want to pull on those threads much. You just want to truncate them, like tie the knot down to the end of the fabric, but not pulling it any tighter than it is as it comes off the machine. I did finally get the zipper foot in the mail for this machine, you'll be happy to hear. So I now have a zipper foot for this machine. I will have to look into getting the foot adapter that you all told me about as well eventually here. But for now, at least now I have a zipper foot and can do my zippers on this machine finally. I also got a narrow hem foot for this machine, but I've never had good luck with those in the past. I just really want to try it again for a project I have coming up. So we'll see. I really can't get the hang of those normally, so we'll have to see how I do. Of course, over here on the ironing board, I'm going to go ahead and press all those darts now. You can see I'm doing this in a solid white, and that is going to be the lining for this. I just grabbed whatever white fabric I had laying around to be able to line this. Again, it's kind of sheer, so having a full lining on this is helpful with such a sheer fabric. I'm actually using a bleached cotton muslin for the backs here, and that front was actually cotton sateen, so it's nice and thick. I'm going to go ahead and line those lining pieces up. Line up the lining along the side seam, right sides together, of course. This is the underarm seam and side seam, making sure I'm pinning my darts down smooth. Just pin that side seam closed, and then also the shoulder seams closed. So I'll just do the shoulder seams and the side seams while I'm over here in both this lining and in the fashion fabric, making these little shells, and then I will go ahead and bag line this whole situation, sewing the lining and the fashion fabric right sides together all the way around, leaving a little bit of space so I can turn them right side out. If you don't know what I mean by bag lining, that's kind of usually the process. It's where you just leave yourself a little bit of an opening, but otherwise sew the whole darn thing together. And again, same in the fashion fabric, side seams, and shoulder seams. You know how I like to batch process this nonsense, so I'll do all my ironing and pinning, and then all my sewing, and then back on over to the ironing board, etc., etc. So I'll go ahead and sew all of those side seams and shoulder seams with 1/2" seam allowance. I again took some of your advice and just went with the blue tape on the needle plate here to mark my seam allowance for now, until I can find an engraved needle plate that will work for this machine. So that will work for now, just 1/2" seam allowance. A lot of times you'll see me and other people add an extra line of stitching down here along the curve of the underarm for an all-in-one sleeve like this. I didn't bother with this time because, again, I was going to be fully lining it, and I wasn't as worried about it coming undone anytime soon here. And then just these straight seams for the shoulder seams here. Of course, always back tacking when I'm starting, unless I'm basting or gathering for some reason. But just go ahead and just keep sewing, honestly, you know? Okay, so back here on the ironing board, I'm going to go ahead and put clips into that curve up to the stitching line under the arms on both sides here so I can iron them out flat. Press this seam open flat. You'll see what that looks like here. So along the straight of the side, it's fine. But up here, you kind of open it up and splay where those little clips are out. Hopefully that makes some sense. And again, yeah, it is more fragile up here, but if you're going to be fully lining it, it should be okay. Then again, my shoulder seams here too at the bottom of this board here. And now my lining is all constructed and ready to go, and I can go ahead and sew the lining and the fashion fabric together. A little bit of a sneak peek of an upcoming project up here in the upper corners, or the upper part of frame here. You can see some green fabric in the center there. That is a green silk taffeta for a huge project I have coming up here that you'll be hearing more about real soon. Unless you are a patron, in which case you already know about that project. But we'll see where that silk taffeta comes into play. Oh, and what is this in the corner of the frame? Is that a corset up there? Listen, stop sneaking peeks. You know, cut it out. Cut it out. So now I can go ahead and pin my lining and fashion fabric together and bag line this whole situation. So I like to match up my shoulder seams first. So here I am at the neckline, matching up the shoulder seams. Right sides together, of course. Match that up. And I will match up the side seam as well, down here along the waist. Again, this top does just end at the waist here. Normally on my bodice patterns, of course, again, I will sew on a skirt, but this top is a little bit cropped. It would only really show if you were, like say, if you didn't wear a slip underneath this and you were dancing around while wearing this, even with a high-waist skirt, you may get a sliver of skin there. Slightly midriff bearing. Or you could even like crop this a little bit more if you came up a little bit on the side seam or across like the waist, you know. If you took an inch off, then you would have a little crop wrapped top, which would be very fun. It certainly still works for the mid-century. They had crop tops in the 1940s. Weirdly enough, they did. But I'm just matching up everything right sides together here, and I'm leaving myself an opening in the bottom of like the center front, and that will be like a hand-sized opening so that I can turn this all right side out in the end here. But I'm going to go ahead and just pin everything all together, matching it up. You'll see me like kind of creeping my fingers along the fabric sometimes, and that is just helping everything to not be out of like whack when it comes to like the weave. Hopefully that makes some sense. Pinning my side seams. Again, pin that seam allowance open so that you don't accidentally get it folded under when you're sewing. But again, here in the middle is where I'm going to be leaving an opening, just like you would with like a pillow, and then I will slip stitch it shut afterwards. So I'm leaving this opening here, big enough for my hand so I can turn this all right side out. I did actually leave the neckline for last here, just to make sure that I can come in here and make it nice and smooth on the end of the pressing board here. But I'm just pinning that V-neck area here, like so. Again, I will need to put clips into these points, I guess, at the shoulder and the V-neck line, so that everything will lie flat when I turn it right side out, but we'll get to that in a minute. So now everything is pinned. You can kind of see the basic structure of this wrap top here. So let's take it over onto the machine and sew this lining and fashion fabric together. And here we are. This is a very long seam to go here. I'm just going to go with half-inch seam allowance all the way around, trying to be good to take my pins out as I go here. I don't know if I remember to the whole way around. Once I get to a corner, I'm going to leave the needle down and then move the project. So I just take the presser foot up, move the project, put the presser foot back down, and then just keep sewing, basically. That's how I get around those little corners, and any shapes in a neckline or anything like that, I always just leave the needle down, turn the project, put the presser foot back down, and keep going. But here I'm just sewing all the way around the edge of this project on this lovely Singer 99K. Here's the neckline, leave the needle down, turn, just keep going. Me and the 99 are still getting along swimmingly, knock on wood, so hopefully she's happy here in her new home, this 99K. Down here at the other side of the wrap here, again, leave the needle down, turn, sew a little bit, leave the needle down, turn, sew, continue on. Look at me remembering to remove my pins. Goodness, what an idea. It's only because I respect this machine, okay? Alright, back here, I'm going to go ahead and clip off those corners, above the stitching, of course, be careful, so I can poke those right side out. I'll be using a knitting needle for that, so I will grab one. And this is actually slightly curved here too, so I'm going to put, I'm talking too fast, so I'm going to put some shallow cuts along this back curve of the waistline as well. Goodness. Can you tell that I had coffee this afternoon? Because I'm talking a mile a minute as usual. Alright, so I'm just going to turn this all right side out, stuff it inside of itself here. It's going to look silly for a minute. There we go. All inside. Shake it out. Pull it out so that our right sides are facing out now. Again, the sleeves are completely loose still as well, so I'll have to turn those in and then slip stitch them for a nice finish as well. But here I've got my knitting needle inside the project, and I'm just poking out those corners so that they're nice and sharp, like so. And of course I need to give this all a press. On the one that you saw last week, I did go ahead and do a line of understitching all along this back wrap and up around the neck and back down the other side. This time I didn't bother. I don't really know why I decided not to, but I did do edge stitching on the other one, I promise. I just didn't do it this time. With this fabric, the majority of it, the outside is white and the inside is pure white as well, so even if the lining showed a little bit along an edge, you wouldn't be able to tell. Who are we kidding? So down here, where the neckline is, again, I've clipped that V-neck you can see here. You can actually kind of see quite well because the seam allowance shows through because this fabric is so sheer. But I'm just taking a little bit of extra care up here to make sure this is all pressed nicely. And sometimes you'll see me pin while something is still warm. That way it cools the way I've pressed it. Hopefully that makes some sense. So you see here I'm pinning this where I just ironed, so it stays and kind of cools off from the iron in the position I put it in. Hopefully that makes some sense. So I'm just going around all the edges that we just, lined this. Here's the corner where I'm going to be sewing my skirt hooks on. You could use hook and eyes, you could use a snap, you could do ribbon ties, again, anything you want up here. All along the waistline here as well, of course. And then I'm going to come up against that open area that I used to turn this right side out, which is right up in here. Here's this open area. So I'm just going to make sure that is pressed with a 1/2 inch seam allowance on either side, which shouldn't be any trouble, seeing as the rest of it is sewn. And I'll go ahead and pin this open area shut, with my pins going the other direction here. And then I will go ahead and slip stitch this shut in a moment. I don't actually show that. I forgot to film it. I think I thought I was filming it and I lost the clip somehow, so I'm sorry about that. But like you would slip stitch a pillow shut, same sort of idea. Just did that for that center back opening and for the hemming of the sleeves as well. Alright, so up here in the sleeves, again, I'm just turning that 1/2 inch, each side, the outside and the inside, both a 1/2 inch inward to match up with the other. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully you can kind of tell what I mean. So that those meet up, and then I can again slip stitch this whole area shut by hand so that it's nice and cleanly finished and invisibly finished, I suppose. And then there will be no exposed seams going on in this, which is why I say you can kind of technically make these reversible if you wanted to. If you wanted to, you'll have to have a hook and a bar on the outside, but if you didn't mind, or if your print is busy enough, you wouldn't really know. But this is a fully encased garment here, so no big problem there. Make sure you're matching up your shoulder seams and side seams when you're doing this, by the way. But now that that's all slip stitched shut, I can't talk tonight, you guys. I'm so sorry, I can't speak. All cleanly finished, I can go ahead and sew on my skirt hooks to finish off this project here. So I'm going to put the bar of the hook on the side seam on the right hand side here, and then I will put the hook facing like outwards towards my back like this so I can hook it shut like so. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that bar on and this hook on like so, and then you can slide it like that and your body goes in here. You see what I'm saying? Yes, precisely. Alright, and now for the other side, of course, I will need to add another bar and hook over here. Again, a bar along the side seam and a hook on the inside of the little extension now. So I'll sew my bar just there and the hook like so. That way I can hook this closed. And that is the last step for this little wrap top, all fully lined and finished inside and ready to wear with those little hooks. And here is my finished second version of this wrap top. It's nearly identical to the one I was wearing in last week's video, of course. I just did the sleeve a tiny bit different on this one, but you can always square this kind of a sleeve. This little extension, like I said, you can just square that off and then it will be just like the one that I was showing you last week. So a little bit of a modification. I will just fold up both of these patterns and put them into I put my patterns in clear Ziploc bags and then I label them. So I'll just have both versions of this available in there the next time I need to make another quick little wrap top like this. I hope those of you who are interested in this style enjoyed this video today. I will be back again on Thursday of this week for my actually scheduled video that I had planned to have come out this week. So I'll be back with another video on Thursday, and then I'll see you next week as well for another vintage inspired sewing project. How unlikely, I know, but I will see you all then. Bye.